Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Tomorrow, the European Union will launch a series of new tariffs on a range of imported American goods. It's in response to duties on steel and aluminium that President Trump imposed last month. The retaliation raises concerns that we could see a trade war developing, which could lead to price rises. So what's going on? Well, fortunately, we have two experts in world trade in the studio to talk us through it all. That's you two, by the way. But first, here's what both sides had to say.
If you take the European Union and you see the kind of tariff they charge, and then we don't, that's called not fair trade. I want fair trade.
This is further weakening the transatlantic relations, and it also increases the risk of severe turbulences in the markets globally. Protectionism can never be a solution, and this will hurt jobs here in the European Union, but also in the US.
Well, Lockwood Smith, you have plenty of experience of trade deals, having served as Minister of Agriculture, Minister for International Trade and Associate Minister of Finance in New Zealand, so plenty there to back you up. Is this now a full-blown trade war?
I hope not, but it's serious because, OK, we've got the EU taking retaliatory action, which one can understand, but you've also got President Trump now threatening China with another. He's already imposed, I think, $50 billion worth of tariffs. Is now talking about 200 billion. Now that it has caused already the Australian New Zealand dollars to shift on global currency trade, and I think we are seeing the potential of a serious situation developing, and it's so unfortunate because I guess if you go back in history, the Great Depression, one of the reasons why it was so bad was because countries started imposing protectionist policies, and so a serious depression became the Great Depression. And we've just emerging from the global financial crisis, and the last thing the world needs now is a trade war. So while I understand the EU's taking retaliatory action, you can't blame them. I hope someone can show some leadership here, because in all these cases, imposing tariffs on imports hurts you more than anyone else. It hurts the country actually imposing the tariffs. Right.
There's politics, though, as well as economics here. And back home, as Trump would say in the US, it'll be a popular policy, a more protectionist style. Is that going to trump the economics here?
I think it's a big part of it, and I think that's why the EU retaliation is actually targeting Trump voters as well as other voters in key congressional districts. So if Trump plays politics, that's what the European is entitled to do under the WTO, because these taxes on steel and aluminium are not actually allowed. So about a third of what the EU is targeting is agriculture. That will hurt farmers. Farmers in the Midwest are big voters of the Republican Party. So I think this is why trade tensions or trade wars are so damaging. Is typically people and consumers and farmers who actually get hit. And actually, the better way for Trump to get America's trade deficit down. He doesn't like the fact that there are more Mercedes in New York than American cars in Berlin. But the way to do that is not to make imports more expensive through taxing them, is to sell more exports. So if he went back and revived the TTIP, which is the free trade agreement between the EU and the US, he may actually be able to sell a few more bobs to Europe. And that would do a lot more to improve the trade position than where we're currently at.
But how do you de-escalate it? You talked about leadership, but now with the EU imposing tariffs on these American goods, what is the next move?
It's such worry, because I think while the EU retaliation is one thing, I think the Chinese situation is, if anything, more damaging, because China is such Chinese economic growth has helped drag the world through the global financial crisis. And if the US and China end up in a trade war, that could be so serious. And what's more, there's some talk of China's economy being a little bit of a challenge. The debt levels, I think, are pretty high. And it's somehow we've got to try and make sure this doesn't just keep getting worse and worse.
How likely is that with China? I mean, is Trump tempting fate by making those sort of incendiary comments about trade with China?
I think in terms of trade with China, he's basically trying a tactic he's now used pretty widely, which is open up your markets or you get more taxes. And I think the problem with using that tactic on the Europeans and us is that our markets are about as open as America's. Average tariffs of the EU are 3.1%. America's is 2.4%. China is relatively close. So he may well try to open up China's markets through these kinds of comments. If it goes badly wrong, we could end up in a trade war. If he succeeds, one might say he's done something that no other country has managed to do. But imposing blanket tariffs on steel and aluminium on everybody, including us, doesn't really make sense because we are not protectionists in that way. And remember, we do have a steel industry in Port Talbot and others where a big portion of our exports do go to America. And so I think this is something that needs to de-escalate. But here's my worry. How you de-escalate it, the EU is taking the US to the WTO, the World Trade Organization. What if Trump decides he's not going to abide by the WTO ruling?
That would be so serious. And of course, already the WTO dispute resolution system is in trouble because the US has refused to appoint certain officials to that dispute process. And so to me, it would be disastrous were the United States to ignore WTO rulings because the WTO is at the heart of the success of global trade. To me, I agree absolutely that if only the US could look at a free trade agreement again. Okay, TTIP didn't get off the ground properly, but there's still the chance to approach it in a different way.
All right.
And get them back. You know, the US could yet come back into TPP as well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I think they will one day.
Well, on another occasion, we'll have to talk about the trade deal with New Zealand and the UK that people are talking about. But that's for another day.